But I would like to invite John to come to the stage and give us the view of how is innovation in our ecosystem changing in the entire corporation. Please welcome John Roese.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, China. I'm thrilled to be here. A couple of things I wanted to talk about that I think are important. One is a little bit about how the innovation process is going to expand in the company and how we should think about it. And then a little bit on a more sober note about why this is so important right now, about the threat if we don't innovate. And I'll give you the conclusion, and that is the best companies in the world that forgot about innovation don't exist anymore. Every single one of them. Digital Equipment Corporation, Wang Technologies, go through the list, all of them. So, but we'll get to that at the end. To start, over the course of the day, we're going to talk about innovation, and we'll touch on all of these in more depth, but I think it's important to recognize that first of all, innovation is a process. Innovation is an ecosystem. It is not a thing or a single point. It has to permeate the organization. And generally, when I talk about innovation and when we discuss the way to handle innovation and to deal with it, it's usually a big, complex discussion, but I've found over the years that it can really be broken into kind of three pieces. The first is that there is a front end of innovation, which is about the idea of finding and cultivating and capturing the ideas from wherever they come. And we'll talk about that. The second is that there is a back end of innovation, which says, if I find those ideas, but I have no ability to execute on them, and they can never become reality, then those ideas are just dreams. They never have an impact. And so the back end is as important, maybe a little less exciting, but as important as the front end. And the third piece that I always try to talk about is the fact that in order to make any of this happen, the organization has to embrace a culture of innovation. They have to change the way they think. They have to treat it as important as their financial model or their day-to-day activity, because again, if it is an afterthought, if it just isn't serious, none of this really actually happens with passion. So on the front end of innovation is all about finding the best ideas. And the interesting thing is, does anyone in here know for sure where the next brilliant idea will come from that will change the world? Anybody got an answer? Okay. And by the way, if you can answer that question, you should pick lottery numbers because you're psychic. It is very hard to figure out where the next great idea is going to come from. So how do you de-risk that? How do you come up with a way to make sure that you have the highest probability of finding that next great idea? Well, the best way to do it is to cast a very wide net, is to build an innovation structure that assumes that you don't know where it will come from, and tries to bring as many people and organizations and diverse ideas into that innovation cycle as possible. One of the things that we've done at EMC, I think very well to date, is we've created a very wide funnel. We have relationships with universities all over the world. We have relationships with our suppliers, which you may not think of them as innovative, but they're doing innovation, and their ideas are interesting catalysts for our ideas. We have innovation conferences like this. And probably the most interesting thing that I think we've done that is as good or better than any company I have been at, and I've been at a number of companies in my career, is this innovation agenda, this pipeline, this journey that we're on, which basically has created a culture that says anyone in the company that has an interesting idea every year has an opportunity to put it forward. Even if it's a crazy idea, even if it comes from a non-traditional space, it gets put forward. And what you'll find is as you look at the 4,000 plus ideas that were submitted, they came from unusual places. Some of them were completely unrealistic, maybe. Some of them were fantasies. Some of them were maybe less interesting. But the bottom line is every one of them contributed to our understanding and our learning. And they created a bigger landscape of ideas that allowed us to look across a broader spectrum and to narrow them down and find the ones that would be most impactful for the company in the near term. But what's important is in that innovation pipeline, even though we only selected 20-something ideas, every single one of those ideas is sitting in a system that we call GINA. Every one of those ideas is in a back office, that those learnings and those ideas and those opinions have been captured. and we will use them to try to correlate future ideas and determine if there is a trend. You know, sometimes the front end of innovation is about timing. You know, the person who created the idea for the cell phone was probably not the guy that invented the cell phone. It was actually more likely to be a science fiction writer maybe 50 years before that. But the technology was not ready to build a cellular device. Were they wrong? No, but the timing wasn't quite right. The technology wasn't there. If the world forgot about that idea, when the technology matured, the person who could connect the dots may not have had dots to connect. In fact, if you talk to the gentleman at Motorola who invented the cell phone, he will absolutely tell you that he was inspired by things like science fiction. Most great technologies have their heritage in fantasy. You know, the phrase that I think has been used a number of times is, you know, sufficiently advanced technology at one point in its life cycle is indistinguishable from magic, meaning it seems to be a fantasy, but the technology catches up. And so all of your ideas, the ones that weren't selected, the ones that maybe were a little too far out, may in fact actually influence our thinking a decade from now or multiple decades from now. And the key is in that front end of innovation to recognize that the more ideas you have, the more diverse perspectives you pull together, the more likely you are to be able to determine the trends and to unleash that particular idea at the right time because you've accumulated the knowledge and wisdom of a population much broader than an individual person.